You know, there's a new edition also called the International Edition. But because it's a Sunday paper, there's no editorial. So we've picked up topics from the science section. Thereafter, there's something called the FAQ, out of which one was related to UCC. We have already given you an overdose of UCC. We already discussed UCC. That is why I did not want to discuss it again. And as it is, you don't have to go into the nitty-gritty of what Uttarakhand is doing specifically. You need to understand the concept which we've already discussed. Thereafter, smaller topics such as Lucknow and ASI and heritage conservation. Thereafter, a new defense system in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. A very interesting development with regards to what are called pseudo satellites. We'll discuss what it means. And a temple inauguration in UAE, which is quite significant in the context of what is happening in India. So when we talk about the topics, as you should know and you should always remember, the Sunday paper never has the editorial, and therefore we have tried to go through topics which matter, because there's no point taking 11, 12, 13 topics which are irrelevant to your preparation. So we'll keep it short, we'll keep it crisp, and we will understand, as we always do, the larger concepts, the smaller concepts, the nitty-gritty points, and then the summaries. So with this, let's begin our first topic or first analysis, which is called hyperlocal extreme weather forecasting, transitioning to it. So transitioning to hyperlocal extreme weather forecasting. Now, this is a very interesting article in the sense that it talks about something related to weather forecasting. And in that context, in the context of we being an agrarian country, the concept of weather forecasting is quite important. So let's try to understand the basic concept here, which is important. That is going to be the way we will move forward. Basic concept, then in the nitty-gritties, and thereafter the summary. So when we talk about the basic concept, see, in India, the IMD, which is the Indian Meteorological Department, is responsible for weather forecasting. Be it drought, be it cyclones, be it water scarcity, be it monsoon models, everything is made by the IMD itself. And more than that, when we talk about the Indian Meteorological Department, in a country which is extremely dependent on its agriculture, and a very big population is dependent on agriculture itself, it is important that we forecast properly. Because as we know, the erratic nature of the monsoons can have an impact on how our agriculture goes, and that could also impact our food security. So basically, India is vulnerable to faulty forecasting, and because most of our farmers are dependent on the monsoon, it is important that we forecast properly. So what I'm trying to establish here is the importance of this institution and the need for it. Which you can see that weather forecasting could be very important in a country where rain, cyclone, heat waves and droughts play a very crucial information when it comes to agriculture, disaster management. And the IMD in that sense is the principal government agency which has been given this task in order to have precise, what we call as complex science of predicting weather patterns. It's a very difficult task in that regard, and in that sense it creates a lot of challenges for the IMD. So what I've established at this point of time is the basic concept and the concept of monsoon, and why is the IMD an important institution in the larger context. Now, because of India's geography, there are three challenges which automatically we face. There are three challenges. One because of the geography, thereafter two related to how do we actually predict these systems. First is called variability. The fact that because India is a tropical country and comes both in the torrid and the temperate zone itself, there's a lot of variability in temperature and weather. So therefore, when we talk about weather forecasting, the issue is that we need to make sure that we take this variation into account. we take this variation into account. Variability is the first issue. Again, I'm trying to put it in a way you can write it in the examination. This is how you convert all of this into a mains answer. Then the second topic, the second concept, or the second bigger issue is that most of the softwares which the IMD is using is Western and more than that outdated. Basically, these are based on the old patterns or systems itself, and they are not able to predict in the world in which we have global warming, we have so much weather variability, we have the concept of climate change. It is not able to take into account these things. The last but not the least and the most important is, and it is a simple point, close to 3 lakh rather, which is called 300,000, 3 lakh ground stations need to be there, which is basically they are going to ones which will pick up the measurements of certain things which are needed. So close to 3 lakh ground stations are needed, and the number is not even close to the number which is needed in that regard. So when we talk about equipment and when we talk about infrastructure wise also, the IMD is extremely short of it. To give you a basic idea, we have 800 automatic weather stations and 1500 automatic rain gauges and 37 Doppler weather radars. On the other hand, the need is for close to 3 lakh ground stations and 70 Doppler weather radars, and this is where the data is not getting generated properly. And in that sense, they are either relying on private data, they're either relying on startups, they're either relying on certain data which is being given by the other agencies in that regard. And therefore, the IMD itself does not have the infrastructure to basically bring up the predictions and bring up the ideas itself. So what I've established in front of you are the three challenges: the variability, and again giving you the larger concept, the variability, the softwares, and thereafter the issues related to ground stations and lack of data which is in front of them. Now, then what is the solution or what is the way forward which basically this article is giving? So as I told you, there are two types of articles which either give you the problem, they give you the solution. This is giving both the problem and the solution, and that is, it is quite important in that sense. So what is the way forward here? What is the way forward, and what are the things which are happening in that regard? Let us try to understand. So I hope that I have established to you properly the concept of challenges. Challenges being the variability because of India's geography, which is temperate, torrid zone both, the issues related to software which are quite outdated, and the issues related to only having 1500 and 80, not even 80 properly, you don't even have the Doppler radars itself, and therefore we are using data either out of private networks or have no data itself. And that is why the word which has been used in the paper is what? The word is called hyperlocal. Hyperlocal means that we have to make sure that we take into account not these bigger systems, that what is going to happen over North India, what is going to happen over South India. We have to go into certain spaces, we have to go into hyper local regional understanding so that we can predict for our farmers what is going to happen. Because as you know, India has such a unique position in which in one part of India there could be drought and the other part of India there could be flood, and therefore there is a shortage of water at one point of time. At the same time there is abundance of water, and therefore hyper locality is very, very important. All these models, Western models, are based on larger, bigger models of the atmosphere. In that regard, we have to have hyper local networks. What is going to happen maybe in a specific city, within that city or that region, what is going to happen? These are called hyper locality in that sense. So I have established variability, the issue of IMD having outdated software, and the concept of not having ground stations. Now, let us see what is the way forward. How do we tackle this, or how is the government tackling this in that larger context? The first is the use of AI and machine learning. There is a need to integrate modern technology into the software itself, and it is very, very clear that the levels of calculations and the level of prediction which is needed, you need machine learning and you need artificial intelligence to work out that. So for better patterns, for better predictions, which are very, very important, and for better understanding, the data should not be basically understood and processed by humans because they can use that energy in somewhere else. Rather, we have machine learning tools and AI tools, which would be a better way of actually moving forward in that sense. Second is something very, very important. It's called WINDS. This has been developed by the Ministry of Agriculture. It's called Weather Information Networks and Data Systems. Now basically WINDS, as you can see, if you take out the first words out of it, WINDS, WINDS, the concept of WINDS is very, very simple, that it will try to develop a concept in which we have agriculture specific data so that our farmers are better informed about the weather itself, and more than that, under it 2 lakh ground stations will be established. Very, very important. Ground stations will be established. And further, this will make sure that the software which are mostly Western are replaced by more Indian oriented, in the sense that we don't care about certain things which the Western sector would be or the West would be caring about. For us, agriculture predictability and agricultural data is very, very significant in that sense. And therefore, WINDS is very, very important that way. Now, the third thing which the IMD is doing and is trying to do is that made in India air quality sensors based machines are developing. As you know, in India and most parts of North India, when it comes to the concept of pollution, when it comes to fog, we are basically choking our modern cities in that sense, and therefore air quality monitoring is also very, very important. Herein IITs are coming together, specifically IIT Delhi is coming together with the IMD to predict and have better understanding of the way of how smog, which is smoke plus fog, smog is basically operating in Delhi and the regions around it. And more than that, this data can then be used by the IMD to also understand the winter season, the fog and the smog in and around North India in certain parts of the season. So therefore, there were 3 basic problems and there are 3 basic solutions. And that is very, very important to understand. The problem of variability can be managed how? The problem of variability can be managed by the concept of AI and machine learning. That is the way. The problem of softwares is also managed by AI and machine learning. On the other hand, this is going to be get managed by WINDS. WINDS as a program is very, very important. It will help India in developing these ground stations, which are extremely significant in the larger context. So this is the basic point of this article. As always, I do this, which is I don't go into the points straight. I want to basically explain to you the article and how it is relevant for your GS paper 3 here, which is basically how can you use this information. Not every article is important, but this is important in creating a certain understanding. So I told you how IMD is very, very important, and thereafter, the issues in forecasting come from the lack of weather monitoring ground stations, from only 800 automated to 1500 automated rain gauges, and the issue wherein they are even using the private sector data. Now, the software prediction systems are also outdated and based on global forecasting systems which are not geared for India, and therefore, how do we manage it? The first is you have to make sure that artificial intelligence and machine learning programs are integrated. Thereafter, you have the WINDS program of the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, wherein you have a long-term hyper-local weather data, and for that 2 lakh ground stations are being established so that they can develop what we call as data which is localized and relevant. For example, if today a farmer gets to know that in MP there will be rain, it is irrelevant to him because he is in a certain part of MP, he is in a certain sector, and therefore localized data is very, very important, and for that you need ground station. Now to add to it, the low cost, highly reliable sensor-based air quality monitoring systems which have been developed in India now, previously very, very expensive, and the IITs and specifically IIT Delhi in establishing a network of air quality sensors is also helping the IMD to develop a better model of weather, a better model of pollution, and in that regard a major step forward in transportation sector, because fog is a big issue when it comes to transport. So be it trains, be it planes, be it cars, all highways, fog data is very, very important. And therefore, it is important that we integrate this data. So before I move forward to the next article, what I want to do is I want to again give you a basic summary. I want to summarize everything and create a certain understanding in your mind. This article is extremely relevant for GS paper 3. When it comes to your science and technology and generally pollution, GS paper 3. Now there are 6 basic points you need to understand. The first, second and third are challenges, and the next 3 are the solutions. Challenges related to variability and the concept of software being outdated. The solution to this is AI and machine learning. On the other hand, the third issue, which is related to lack of infrastructure, is through WINDS, the weather's information networks and the concept of weather information networks and data systems. This has been developed by the Ministry of Agriculture in order to make sure that we have the requisite 2 lakh ground stations so that we have what we call as localized data. This is very important. Localized data. Localized data is very, very important in that sense. Now, more than that we also are using as a solution the concept of air quality sensors, and air quality sensors are important for predicting fog and smog so as to make sure that the transportation sector is not impacted. So I hope that you can remember these basic points. You rarely get these type of articles which give you the problem also and the solution together, and therefore it is quite significant. With this, let's move to the second article. The second article deals with the new Water Act, which is basically there has been amendment to the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Amendment Act, and basically the 1974 Act has been now amended in 2024. Now there are 2 sides to the story. Basically, what does this act actually do and what are the changes? Again, I am trying to give you the basic picture here, and then we will understand it through the PPT and through the basic points made in the article itself. Now, when we talk about the act itself, the Water Act, this was one of the first legislations which was developed as a way of controlling water contamination and water pollution. Basically, water pollution and water contamination. The concept of this act was to make sure that fresh water, grey water and sewage don't get mixed up. And under this Water Act, you have the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Board being established. So the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Board, both of them were established under this act itself. And more than that, that ways, it is one of the pioneering act which basically established an understanding that pollution is not good for the environment. And this was India's way of responding to the various conventions which are happening, specifically when it comes to water pollution. Water is extremely important for sustainability, and therefore water contamination and water pollution is something which it targeted. So the Water Act, water pollution and contamination, the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Board were established. So that was a very significant act because it is the establishing act when it comes to a regime with regards to pollution control. Now, there are certain provisions in this act which have now been amended. But there are two things which you need to understand is that how can center legislate on water? See, water is a state list subject. Water is a state list. As per our lists, legislative division of power, legislative jurisdiction, water comes under state list. But the question is, how can the center legislate on water? And this whole act itself, which is the Water Prevention and Control Pollution Amendment Act 2024, is based on the premise of a very interesting article of the Constitution, which is 252. Under Article 252 of the Constitution, if two states pass a resolution in the legislative assemblies, two or more states rather, if they pass a resolution in this legislative assembly where they want the center to legislate on a state subject, then the center or the parliament becomes empowered to legislate on that issue. And therefore, the request here with regards to this has actually been using this article 252, which is the legislation by which the legislators of two or more states pass a resolution and request the center to make a law on a certain item of the state list, and it shall be lawful for the parliament to make something like this. And here the request has come from Himachal Pradesh and Rajasthan and automatically will apply to UTs itself. So the reason why we are seeing this amendment is because Himachal Pradesh and Rajasthan both have actually requested the parliament to amend the Water Act itself, and therefore we are now seeing how you can see polity and environment, polity and GS paper 3 are intersecting because they are using an article, center-state relationship, standard article. Two or more states, if they want, they can ask the parliament to legislate on a state list and state subject in that regard. That is what is happening here. So there are two things again which you need to understand. First, Water Act, the water pollution concept, contamination, Central Pollution Control Board and State Pollution Control Board were established under it. Second, how is that water which is under state list is getting legislated by the center? And the concept is Himachal Pradesh and Rajasthan have asked under Article 252 for the center to legislate and amend certain provisions which were becoming a problem in the long run or larger problematic aspects here. So this is the first thing, which again I hope you have understood and have established properly. Now let's discuss the provisions which have been amended. Provisions which have been amended in the sense that what are the provisions which have been amended, what is the concept, what is the issue which was there. So the first, I will on this side write the original provision and on this side I will write the amended provision, or rather the new provision. Amendment has happened, new provision. So this is how again you make notes, which is that in your basic registers or your repositories you can make this so as to know what was the original provision and thereafter what is the new provision. Now the original provision said that if there was any minor violation in any provisions of this act, the concept of imprisonment plus fines was there, that you could go to jail for any minor violation. Now the concept of minor violation has been made a little bit better in the sense, now the new provision says if there is minor violation, if there is any minor violation, no imprisonment, this concept has been removed. Rather, you have 10,000 to 15 lakh rupees as fine. Now, this could be both a good thing and a bad thing. Because what does a minor violation mean? For example, minor violation would have been that I'm an industry and I work with, for example, arsenic. But by mistake, arsenic was added to the water. It's a minor violation. However, the water which it is going into will be then processed and thereafter will become drinking water. In that context, this minor violation can have a health impact on lakhs of people, and people could become sick because of arsenic poisoning. Now, in that context, does 15 lakh rupees actually make any sense? No. However, the same thing could be applied in reverse logic. So it could be used in both positive and negative sense, which is that, for example, I did a very minor violation, which is that the length of the pipe through which it should be going is a little bit longer or shorter. Then it makes no sense that I will go to jail for 3 years. So this provision is a slippery slope, can be used both ways. Can be used both ways. Now, this is still okay. Minor provisions, the concept of government is saying is that there's a trust deficit, we need to stop it, and therefore the trust deficit issue is coming here. But the second provision is more problematic. See, under the Water Act, the state pollution control board actually gives, or you need to take a license if you are any industry which uses water and discharges water. You have to take a license from the license or permission from the state pollution control board. This was mandated, and this is the concept itself. In order to establish any industry which uses water and discharges water, more important, discharges water, which is basically it has used that water and it discharges water, it was mandatory, any industry, mandatory to take a permission and a license from the state pollution control board. Now, this has again been diluted in a way, both positive, negative in that sense, because now if with consultation with the Central Pollution Control Board, it can direct the State Pollution Control Board to exempt certain industries from taking any of these basic, what we call as licenses or permissions. So if the Central Pollution Control Board directs the State Pollution Control Board that this industry is exempted, then the State Pollution Control Board permission is not needed. Again, something which may be something larger when it comes to how we are going to see certain changes in India or the industrial landscape in that sense. But the point here is very, very simple, that this can again be misused. What industries? Which industries? Nothing has been specified in that regard. So this again is a provision which can have both positive and negative impact. And last but not the least, there are two further provisions. There are two further provisions. I'll just write them down. Original and new. The concept is that the Central Pollution Control Board did not have the right to cancel consent. So, see, the Central Pollution Control Board could not take away the consent of the State Pollution Control Board, but under new, the Central Pollution Control Board can take away the State Pollution Control Board consent. It can rightfully say that you gave an industry a certain license and I will take it away from it. So therefore, more centralization in the sense that the Central Pollution Control Board can in that sense take away a license. And last but not the least, which was not there in the original provision, is that if you tamper with any monitoring device, then you will for sure be penalized through fine. And this is where basically the 4 major provisions have been amended. I am again going to repeat them, but in a more quick way. The fact is minor violation, previously you could get imprisoned. Now there is no concept of jail or imprisonment on minor violation. Second is you have to get or you needed to get a State Pollution Control Board license permission to establish any industry using water and discharging water. Now there is no need if the Central Pollution Control Board has exempted that class of industries in that. Last but not the least, 2 things. Central Pollution Control Board can take away the consent which the State Pollution Control Board has given previously, and thereafter tampering of monitoring devices is now penalized with fines. And the basic concept is they're trying to create both a regime which is open but is also not very harsh on industries, which is again both ways a little bit dangerous in that sense. So I hope that you understand these 4 points. Very significant because this amendment has very long lasting impact and is going to change the whole regime itself. So have to know the provisions which were original and the ones which have changed now. So let's understand this through the PPT, and then I'll summarize the 2 big topics and we can move to the prelims tidbit section. So you have this act getting passed by the Rajya Sabha also by February 5th, and therefore it has now become a proper amendment act. The fact is this was the first piece of legislation which tried to give institutional structure to pollution control and water contamination. In September of 1974, the Central Pollution Control Board and the State Pollution Control Boards were established under this act, and therefore it made mandatory for all industrial units to get permission from their respective state boards before setting up a factory, or make sure and submitting checks on whether their manufacturing and other things are under the prescribed norms. And therefore this is a very significant concept. It created a monitoring regime which may now have been challenged. Now the question with regards to how is that the center is legislating on water, that comes from Article 252. Now the amendment will as of right now only apply to Himachal Pradesh and Rajasthan, which had actually asked for this legislation. Other states can join in that regard. Previously the 1974 Act used to apply on 25 states. Now the most important change is to remove the provision for imprisonment for several violations deemed as minor and having a fine for it. As per the original act, the State Pollution Control Board's permission was needed for anywhere where the treatment of water was happening and there was discharge into any form of landmass. And in the amended bill, now the Central Pollution Control Board may exempt certain categories of industries from obtaining this consent. This is where there's a dilution little bit. Thereafter, it also says that the Central Pollution Control Board can refuse a grant or cancel a grant which was given by the State Pollution Control Board, and it also penalizes tampering with monitoring devices with the same type of penalty. And last but not the least, it also gives the center the right to or empowers to have rules and regulations to select the chairpersons of the State Pollution Control Boards and frame guidelines with regards to how new operating processes should be there. So in a way, if you look at it, center power has increased quite a lot. The Central Pollution Control Board power has increased quite a lot. State Pollution Control Board have now come under the control of the State Central Pollution Control Board in that sense. So before we move to the prelims oriented topic, we've discussed 2 very important articles, both related to GS paper 3, and you have GS paper 2 component also. The first one was related to the concept of how we need what is called micro or hyperlocal weather forecasting. 3 issues we identified as problems. First one being variability, second one being the issue related to how with variability we have software which is outdated, and third was lack of infrastructure. Thereafter we saw the solution for that, and the solution for that was the form of winds, the concept of machine learning and AI, and more than that you have the cheap air quality, what we call cheap and very effective air quality sensors for fog and smog. Thereafter we have in the past 15-20 minutes established with regards to pollution and the relationship between these two bodies and the new Water Act which has been amended in 2024. We have established 5 basic provisions which have changed. One, no imprisonment on minor violation. Second, the concept of the mandatory license permission not needed. Then the permission given getting cancelled. Thereafter, last, tampering with monitoring devices, again a penalty. And then the center can also create more operating procedures, and how the chairpersons of the state pollution control boards will be actually taken into. So that way, two very interesting topics related to GS paper 3. Very important. As I said, Sunday paper, there is no editorial. Now, with this, we move to the prelims tidbit section. Here, we go into topics which are smaller, straightforward. What you have to learn, I will tell you the straightforward thing. So the first one is that in Lucknow, the Allahabad High Court has actually argued that the 2013 High Court order of removing encroachments over the Nawabi era ASI protected monuments should be implemented. This topic it's in itself for Lucknow is not important, but Lucknow has a major issue with regards to close to 60 protected monuments facing encroachment. But this adds to any mains question which comes in art and culture with regards to any form of challenges to our heritage. And therefore, one of the biggest challenges which we are seeing right now is the concept of encroachment. And therefore, it becomes important. This is the point you have to remember. Thereafter, you have in Andaman and Nicobar Islands 2 very important developments. The Chief of Naval Staff, Admiral Hari Kumar, has actually inaugurated 2 things. One is called PAR, which is Precision Approach Radar, which has been named as INS Utkrosh. Now, basically, INS Utkrosh is for the horizontal and vertical accuracy when it comes to aircraft landing in low visibility in rain and fog. Basically, on islands, if we have small runways and there is an approach with very bad weather, which would be very common in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands itself, INS Utkrosh or the PAR system actually gives you certain radar linings for the plane to line up in the right way on the runway itself. And in that sense, PAR is used in all leading airports in that regard, but now being used by military in that sense to make sure that the connectivity with Andaman and Nicobar Islands is not gone. So basically, it lines up horizontal and vertically. Basically, it's a anti-fog and rain transportation, what we call as non-visibility system. So basically, even when there is no visibility, it will guide you to land on the runway in that sense. The second thing is called the IUHDSS, which is Integrated Underwater Harbor Defense and Surveillance System. Basically, this has been put in Port Blair in order to make sure that any tracking of surface and underwater targets in the naval jetty is done. So nobody can this is basically anti-submarine technology in order to make sure that nobody comes in underwater into the jetty and do something in a naval establishment. So you have to remember here INS Utkrosh and the concept of how we have an underwater surveillance system. Standard question related, if in the examination Utkrosh comes in, you would be more inclined to write it as or identify it as a destroyer or something like that, but it is not. It is a precision approach radar for aircraft. Then we have another CSIR NAL very important development with regards to the CSIR National Aerospace Laboratories. They have developed a very interesting thing. Basically, they've developed an unmanned aerial vehicle which can go into the stratosphere and act like a satellite. That is why it's called a pseudo satellite. The basic point is commercial airliners and the level at which you have the aeroplanes, it goes much above it, and thereafter, without leaving the Earth's atmosphere, it can hover around for days in a certain sector in order to make sure that there is either connectivity or surveillance. There are two basic things which are there. One is connectivity, the other one is surveillance, wherein the unmanned aerial vehicle can be hovering in the stratosphere and can give us certain imagery or maybe, for example, connectivity. So the high altitude pseudo satellite HAPS has been developed, under which it goes into the stratosphere powered by solar cells and batteries and can hover for days in that sector, and therefore HAPS can be used for 5G connectivity or surveillance, and it is basically called the towers in the sky. It's like a cell phone tower in the sky. It can stay there. They have right now only tried a smaller one, but when they will try in 2027, by the time they will be able to develop it, they will basically have an unmanned aerial vehicle which could be as big as a Boeing 737, and this could hover around for 90 days and at 23 kilometers to give us surveillance footage. So for defense and for surveillance and for connectivity, this could be a major breakthrough in that sense. So remember HAPS and CSIR National Aerospace Laboratories. Very, very important that way. Now, last but not the least, a very interesting development. Our Prime Minister is going to inaugurate another Hindu temple, a very major one in Abu Dhabi. And this has been developing since 2019 on a 27-acre land which had been donated by the UAE government. Remember, he is on a tour on 13th and 14th February in the UAE. A very significant development. That way, should know where these temples are coming up. Again, art and culture, basic current affairs in that sense. So, before I end, as you remember, you should know HAPS, you should know INS Utkrosh, you should know the concept of the UAE and Abu Dhabi temple, and last but not the least, you should know the 3 challenges and the 3 solutions to weather forecasting and the 4 amendments to the concept of our Water Act. With this, let's look at the mains questions. Integration of modern technology and new infrastructure is key for IMD. Elucidate. Basically, you have to write the points which I've told you, challenges, solutions. In the context of the recent amendment in the Water Act, discuss the provisions of the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Amendment Act. This is a straightforward question which basically is a current affairs question which can come in GS paper 3. This is GS paper 3. This is also GS paper 3. Very significant that way. With this, I would like to end the session. Thank you so much. I will see you on Monday with another set of issues with the editorial there. We'll have a better discussion. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.